Who poured this on my wife's head?" The room froze. Every voice, every whisper, every chuckle died in an instant as the man in the Tom Ford suit stepped out of the private elevator. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It cut through the tension like a scalpel. Behind him stood 3 security guards, stone-faced, ready to act. But it wasn't the security that terrified them. It was the man himself. Mason Carter, billionaire tech mogul, founder of Carter Tech, and now standing protectively beside the soaking wet woman they had just humiliated, her husband. Emily's smirk vanished, Craig's phone slipped from his hand, and Thalia Jackson, still dripping with Coca-Cola, simply looked up calm, composed, powerful. "You had no idea who I was," she said softly, "but you're about to find out what silent power really means." What started as a cruel joke on the only black woman in the office was about to explode into the most career-ending lesson of their lives. Because this wasn't just about spilled soda. This was about dignity, about racism, and about one woman who quietly gathered the truth until the moment was right to tear the entire system down. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Thalia Jackson had always known she was different. Not because she was quiet, not because she kept to herself, but because, in a room full of sleek suits and Ivy League degrees, she was the only black woman and the only one who came from nothing. Every morning, she walked into the Westbridge Media Tower in downtown Chicago with her head held high, her natural curls perfectly coiled, her navy blouse crisp, her notes organized to the letter. She truly believed that her hard work would speak louder than her skin color. She was wrong. It started with small things. Ideas stolen in meetings. Jokes made just loud enough for her to hear. Invitations to team lunches that never reached her inbox. At first, she gave people the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they forgot. Maybe she misunderstood. But by the 5th month, the message was clear. You don't belong here. Still, she stayed, she listened, she worked, she watched. Because Thalia knew something they didn't. Power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits. It watches. And when it strikes, it does so with precision. And as we'll soon see, her silence was never weakness. It was a weapon. That Friday, the office felt emptier than usual. Pre-holiday hush, fewer eyes, fewer witnesses. A perfect day for cruelty. Thalia stood at the printer, gathering charts she'd stayed late to finish. Investor projections, efficiency models, data no one else had dared to touch. She turned and there stood Emily Sharp. Blonde, perfectly manicured, manager of the team, and smiling, but not kindly. "Oh, Thalia," Emily said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Still trying to prove you're more than just our diversity hire." Before Thalia could respond, she felt it. Cold, wet, sticky. Coca-Cola, cascading from the top of her head, soaking into her blouse, her papers, her skin. A gasp rippled through the open-plan office. And then laughter. From Craig, from Jenna in HR, even from Mark at the back, who had never spoken to her before. Phones rose. Cameras rolled. #diversity shower. Craig snorted, filming like it was a prank video. No one stopped them. No one spoke up. And Thalia, she didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She just stood there, soda dripping from her curls, looking each of them in the eye. They thought she was frozen in fear. But the truth, she was just getting started. Emily dropped the empty can on Thalia's desk like it was trash. "Oops," she said, her tone sugary sweet. "Guess those ideas needed a little refreshing." More laughter, a few snorts. Someone muttered, "She won't last a week after this." Craig leaned in with his phone. "Say hi to your Uber boyfriend." He jeered. "Bet he's waiting outside in the rain." Thalia's hands trembled, but not from fear. She calmly set down her papers, ruined and soaked. She wiped her hands on a tissue and picked up her phone. No rage, no raised voice, just one message. Sent. Emily raised an eyebrow. Texting HR, "Sweetheart." "No," Thalia said softly, her voice steady. "Texting someone who actually runs this place." Craig snickered. "What? Your cousin at FedEx?" Thalia didn't answer. She just checked the time on her watch. 15 minutes. Not a second more. They laughed louder, oblivious, and yet something in her stillness unsettled them. The way she stood, the calm in her eyes, it wasn't the look of someone broken. It was the look of someone ready. Ready to flip the script. Because what they didn't know, what they never bothered to find out, was who she really was. And who was about to walk through that door. The private elevator on the 38th floor hadn't lit up in months. Most employees didn't even know it worked. But at 3:15 p.m., the soft ding echoed across the open office. Heads turned. Phones lowered. 3 security guards stepped out first silent, precise, scanning. And then him, Mason Carter. 6'3", impeccably tailored, calm but dangerous, like a storm behind glass. Everyone knew the name, the face, the billions. But no one expected to see him here. Emily's mouth dropped open. Craig stepped back. And Thalia, she didn't move, didn't speak, just locked eyes with her husband, who walked toward her like the rest of the room didn't exist. "Thalia," Mason said, his voice low, sharp, deadly calm. "Are you hurt?" Thalia shook her head once. Mason turned slowly to the crowd. To the people who had laughed. To the ones who filmed. To the ones who did nothing. And then his eyes landed on Emily. "You poured something on my wife?" he asked. His voice wasn't loud, but it didn't have to be. Because the power in that room had shifted and everyone felt it. Emily swallowed hard, trying to find her voice. It was just a joke." Mason didn't blink. Neither did Thalia. "A joke," Mason repeated, his gaze icy. "Tell me." "Miss Sharp, do you often laugh while degrading your colleagues in front of the entire floor?" Emily's face turned pale. She glanced around, but no one came to her defense. Not Craig, not Jenna, not even Mark. Silence had taken over. Then Mason looked at Craig, still recording. Craig stammered, It was just for HR, in case she overreacted." "Oh, she didn't overreact," Mason said, "but you did." He took a step closer. "Security," he called calmly, without looking back. "Remove these 3 from the premises." The guards moved swiftly toward Emily, Craig, and Jenna. Craig flinched. Jenna froze. Emily stepped forward, desperation creeping into her voice. Wait, you can't just walk in here and fire people. This isn't your company." Mason raised an eyebrow. "Yes, it is." He turned and reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a sleek black folder. "Carter Tech is the majority stakeholder of Westbridge Media. We bought controlling interest 8 months ago." Dead silence. Phones buzzed, eyes widened, someone gasped. Emily's legs wobbled beneath her. She looked at Thalia, soaked, still but standing taller than ever. "You married him," she whispered. Thalia's answer was quiet. "Yes, and now you know who I am." Craig's jaw hung open. This has to be illegal. Mason ignored him. He turned to Thalia, brushing a damp curl gently off her cheek. Let's finish this. At that cue, one of the guards handed Mason a tablet. He tapped the screen and turned it toward the crowd. There it was, the video Craig had filmed, now playing in full color and full sound. Emily's smirk, the splash of Coke, the laughter, the hashtags, the mocking, the cruelty. Gasps filled the room. A few employees looked away. Some whispered, some didn't dare breathe. Then Mason's voice returned, calm but thunderous. This office fostered a racist, hostile, and humiliating environment for my wife, and judging by the silence from all of you, many allowed it to happen. He turned toward the larger team now, scanning their stunned faces. I won't sue this company, he said. I'll rebuild it. Without them. Emily tried one last time. I didn't know who she was. And that's the problem, Thalia said firmly. You didn't care to know, because to you, I was just the black girl at the end of the table. A pause. Then she added, but now, I sit at the head of it. As security led Emily, Craig, and Jenna toward the exit. Whispers rippled across the office. Some stared in disbelief. Others looked down, ashamed. And Thalia, she didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply walked to her desk, picked up her soaked documents, and placed them gently into a folder. Then she turned to the room. I stayed silent, she began, voice steady. Not because I was weak, but because I needed you to show who you really are. A few co-workers shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. No one asked where I went to school. No one cared that I pulled the highest performance numbers for the last 3 quarters. You only saw what you wanted to see. She walked slowly toward the glass conference room, the very one where they had laughed just an hour earlier. Inside, a projector lit up, and on the screen appeared a title, Documented Discrimination 6 Months at Westbridge Media. Slides began rolling emails, texts, voice memos, camera footage. Every insult, every joke, every time her ideas were presented by someone else and given credit. Gasps echoed. Someone whispered she kept everything. Yes, she had. Because silent power doesn't just endure. It records. It waits. And then it rises. A legal voice broke the silence. Marcus Lynn, legal counsel for Carter Tech and Thalia's personal attorney. The man in the charcoal suit stepped forward, placing thick folders on the table in front of HR. These documents contain proof of workplace harassment, racial discrimination, and a hostile work environment, all recorded, time-stamped and verified. He opened one folder. Emails mocking her background, voice clips dismissing her input, internal chats where she was called a Quota win and worse. Craig stopped in his tracks. We were joking. She never filed a complaint. Thalia looked at him, calm and unshaken. I wasn't here to complain, she said. I was here to observe. Emily tried to turn it around, but why didn't you say anything? Why stay? Thalia stepped forward. Because I wanted to earn my place. I didn't want to be seen as someone who only had a seat at the table because of my last name. She turned toward the screen again. Another slide appeared. Project Horizon Predictive Analytics Engine. Developed by Thalia Jackson. Estimated value $42 million. The room gasped again. You thought I was just another face, Thalia said. But while you mocked me, I was building the future of this company. And now that future was hers. A quiet murmur spread across the office as the next slide appeared on the screen. Exclusive patent holder Thalia Jackson. Mason spoke next, his voice composed but resolute. Effective immediately. All licensing rights to Project Horizon are being transferred to the Thalia Initiative, a scholarship fund for young black women in tech. He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. The value of those shares, he looked at Emily, Craig, and Jenna, will come directly from your severance and equity. Craig's mouth fell open. You can't do that. We already did, Marcus replied, sliding another document across the table. Emily looked like she might collapse. My reputation, my career. Thalia turned to her, gaze unwavering. You spent months trying to destroy mine, she said. You succeeded in humiliating me, isolating me, making me feel small. A pause. But you failed to realize that the quietest person in the room is often the one writing the ending. She walked back to her desk and picked up her bag. Then she turned one last time to the team that had doubted her. This isn't revenge, she said softly. It's justice. And with that, Thalia walked out head high, purpose clear, and a movement about to begin. That night, Thalia didn't sleep. Not out of anxiety, but clarity. She sat by her window, watching the Chicago skyline flicker against the dark, her laptop glowing softly on the table beside her. On the screen was a single file, long prepared, carefully built. Proposal Carter Tech Diversity and Innovation Fund. While others scrambled to delete posts, call lawyers, or beg for second chances, Thalia was already planning the next step. Because to her, this wasn't about punishing 3 people. It was about dismantling a pattern and rebuilding something better. The next morning, a memo went out from Carter Tech headquarters. Subject line: New standard for equity across all divisions. Inside a sweeping policy shift, mandatory diversity audits, anonymous reporting tools, protected pipelines for underrepresented talent. All inspired by one woman's experience. And as the company buzzed with speculation and stunned reactions, one thing became clear. This wasn't a publicity move. It was a systemic shift. The kind that doesn't just change the story, it changes the culture. And while Thalia remained quiet, working from home that day, her name echoed through every meeting, every message, every mind. The black woman they mocked. She had just redesigned the entire company, without saying a word. By noon, news had spread beyond the walls of Westbridge. Tech blogs picked up the story first. Carter Tech exec's wife uncovers racism at subsidiary. Then came the think pieces, the Twitter threads, the hashtags. Silent power. Not just diversity. Thalia Jackson effect. People were hungry for more than gossip. They were hungry for truth. And Thalia's quiet defiance struck a nerve, especially for those who had been overlooked, underestimated, and unheard. But inside the company, the atmosphere was different. Some employees felt shame. Others felt exposed. A few those who had quietly supported Thalia complimented her work, asked her real questions, now wished they had spoken louder. And then, an unexpected moment. In the break room, Marcus, the intern, stood up during lunch. I just want to say, he began nervously, that I saw what happened last week and I didn't speak up. I was scared. But I should have. I'm sorry. Heads turned. Then someone else spoke. And another. Stories poured out about discomfort, bias, fear of rocking the boat. But Thalia's courage had shaken something loose. Because once someone lights a match in a dark room, others realize they were never alone. Change, real change, doesn't always start loud. Sometimes it starts with a whisper. and it ends with a roar. That afternoon, Thalia returned to the office, not because she had to, but because she chose to. She walked through the lobby with quiet grace, her heels tapping steadily against the marble floor. No one looked away this time. No one avoided her gaze. Instead, they stood. Some even applauded. It wasn't about fame or fear. It was about respect. In the executive conference room, she met with the board. No introductions were needed. They knew exactly who she was now. And when Mason offered her an executive role, she declined. "I don't want a title," she said. "I want a platform." She placed a document on the table. The Thalia Initiative, fully funded, fully structured, and fully independent. Its mission: mentorship, access, and scholarships for Black women in data science and engineering. The board voted unanimously to approve it. One director leaned forward. "You could have walked away after what they did." "I almost did," Thalia admitted. "But I realized walking away would only help the next Emily, the next Craig." She stood, her voice calm but unwavering. "You don't fix racist systems by escaping them." She paused, then added, "You fix them by building something so strong they can't break it again." 3 weeks later, the skyline shimmered with early evening light as Thalia stepped onto the stage of the Innovation Equity Forum in San Francisco. She wore a simple black suit. No designer labels. No spotlight. Just presence. The kind that didn't need permission to be felt. Before her sat an audience of executives, founders, students, many of them young, many of them Black, many of them carrying the same invisible weight she once had. She didn't begin with a statistic. She didn't start with applause. She started with truth. "I was never supposed to be here." Thalia said, "I was supposed to be silent, grateful, obedient." A hush fell over the room. They laughed at my ideas, called me a diversity token, dumped soda on my head to remind me where they thought I belonged. Her voice didn't crack, it cut. But what they poured on me didn't drown me. She paused. It watered something deeper. The screen behind her lit up. The Thalia Initiative, 127 scholarships approved, 3 companies under review. The audience erupted in applause. But Thalia didn't smile for the crowd. She smiled for the girl in the 3rd row, wide-eyed, brown-skinned, scribbling every word. Because this wasn't just a moment. It was a movement. After the forum, a line of people formed: students, professionals, even CEOs, each wanting a moment with her. Some thanked her. Others apologized. But one woman, older, quiet, held Thalia's hands and whispered, "I waited 30 years for someone like you to show them who we really are." Thalia didn't have the words. She just nodded. Because the truth was, she hadn't done this for recognition. She'd done it because she remembered what it felt like. To sit in meetings where no one listened. To work twice as hard for half the credit. To be seen as a checkbox instead of a colleague. Back in her hotel room that night, Thalia opened her laptop. Dozens of emails flooded in from companies asking to partner, schools requesting her as a speaker, young women sharing their stories of silent power. She read each one and replied to every single girl, because that's what this was really about. Not revenge, not legacy, but connection. She knew that every time a young Black woman saw her, believed in herself a little more, spoke up a little louder, that was the real change. And it was just beginning. Because when one rises in silence, she lifts 1,000 more. The next morning, Headlines lit up every corner of the internet. From humiliation to power, the rise of Thalia Jackson. Silent power isn't just a movement, it's a revolution. In boardrooms, classrooms, and lunchrooms, people were really talking about race, respect, and the price of silence. Some companies scrambled to revise their policies. Others reached out, asking for help to change from within. But the most powerful ripple came from unexpected places. Craig, once the loudest mocker, posted a public apology. It went viral not because people forgave him, but because it proved Thalia's point they never thought consequences would come. Emily was never seen in the industry again. Her name became a cautionary tale in HR trainings. And Jenna, she sent a letter. A long one. No excuses, no blame. Just remorse. Thalia read it. And then, with a quiet breath, she archived it. Not because she forgot, but because she had more important things to focus on now. Young girls to mentor. A pipeline to build. A standard to redefine. She sat at her desk, coffee in hand, city waking up outside her window. And with a calm strength, she opened her planner and wrote one word at the top of the page. Forward. Because that's what silent power does. It never looks back. It leads. It had been 4 months since the day they called her a joke. Since the Coke spilled. Since the silence ended. But for Westbridge Media, the real fall had only just begun. Shareholders were pulling out. Partnerships crumbled overnight, one by one. Clients canceled contracts, some publicly, others quietly, but all for the same reason. Reputation. The stain wasn't just on a blouse anymore. It was on the company's name. An internal audit revealed what Thalia had always known: diversity at Westbridge had been performative. Policies written for show, not substance. And the world was watching now. Reporters dug up old complaints. Former employees came forward, and by the time the board tried to respond, it was too late. Lawsuits were filed. Fines mounted. And for the first time in its history, Westbridge Media announced mass layoffs not because of market conditions, but because of moral failure. Meanwhile, Thalia didn't say a word. She didn't need to. She watched from a distance, not with spite, but with clarity. Because this wasn't about celebrating someone else's collapse. It was about showing what happens when a system protects cruelty and punishes courage. And now, the reckoning had arrived. Not loud, but certain. Inside the now half-empty Westbridge building, whispers had replaced laughter. The desks near Thalia's old spot sat vacant. Her name, once mocked in private chats, now echoed in quiet conversations, often followed by guilt. Even the break room felt different. No more smug comments, no more jokes, just silence and the weight of consequence. But the deepest fall came for those who thought they were untouchable. Emily's LinkedIn had vanished. Craig's attempts to find work were met with closed doors and quiet HR calls referencing documented behavior. Jenna moved to another city, but her name followed. The world had changed. Not because of a press release, but because of a woman who refused to be erased. In private, some employees admitted what they never dared to say aloud: they had seen the signs. They had heard the jokes. And they had stayed silent, until silence no longer protected them. And Thalia, she wasn't there to witness it. She was in New York, meeting with 3 Fortune 500 executives to discuss mandatory equity audits. Not for revenge, for progress. Because, as she told them that day, you can't claim to lead the future if your foundation is built on exclusion. The message was clear, and this time everyone listened. At the end of that meeting in New York, one executive leaned forward. "You've shaken the industry, Thalia," he said. "But what made you stay quiet for so long?" Thalia smiled faintly. "I wasn't quiet," she replied. "I was documenting." They exchanged glances, realizing what it truly meant to move in silence. Because while others were focused on politics, power, and profit, she had been laying the groundwork for change. Brick by brick, policy by policy, proof by proof. That evening, her inbox lit up. An invitation from Harvard, a request from the White House, and a video message from a high school student in Detroit. "Miss Jackson," the girl said shyly, "because of you, I applied to college and I believe I belong there." Thalia watched the message twice, then 3 times. And finally, with tears in her eyes, she whispered, "You do." She closed her laptop, walked to the window, and looked out at the city that once tried to shrink her. Now, she was reshaping it. Not through speeches, not through anger, but through unwavering, silent power. And as the lights flickered across the skyline, one truth pulsed brighter than ever. When you rise for yourself, you rise for others. And that is how real change begins. 6 months had passed since that Friday. The day soda hit her curls. The day silence broke. And now, Thalia stood inside a different kind of auditorium, this one filled with hope. The inaugural Thalia Initiative Scholarship Gala was underway in Atlanta. Over 400 guests filled the room, students, families, business leaders, and allies. But the real stars sat in the front row, 50 young black women, each holding an acceptance letter to the college of their dreams. Each funded by the very system that once tried to silence someone like them. Thalia stepped onto the stage, no notes in hand, just her truth. "I'm not here tonight because I'm extraordinary," she began. "I'm here because I had the privilege of proving myself when others would have been pushed out." She looked at the students, their eyes wide, their shoulders back. "You don't need to prove your worth," she said softly. "You already have it. You just need a world that sees it." Applause filled the room, but Thalia's gaze stayed on them. Because this moment wasn't about her anymore. It was about who came next. And she intended to make sure their path was nothing like the one she had to walk. Not ever again. After the ceremony, the students crowded around her, some crying, some smiling, all inspired. One girl clutched her scholarship letter with shaking hands. "My mom works 2 jobs," she whispered. "She thought we'd never afford college. And now, I'm going to Howard." Thalia hugged her tightly. "This," she said, "is why we don't quit." Elsewhere in the room, cameras flashed. Journalists scribbled notes. But Thalia's focus never wavered. Because this was the mission. Not just breaking glass ceilings, but replacing them with open skies. Later that evening, Mason joined her on the balcony, a quiet smile on his face. "You did it," he said. Thalia shook her head gently. "We did it." He looked at her, proud. "You think they know what you've really done here?" She turned, her eyes scanning the city skyline. "No," she said, "not yet, but they will." Because while the gala was a celebration, the real work was only beginning. More partnerships to form, more barriers to break, more girls to reach. And Thalia was ready, because she understood something many never would. You don't need a stage to be powerful. You just need purpose. And hers had never been clearer. Lift others, light the path, and never ever look back. As the night wound down, Thalia took a moment to step away. She walked quietly into the now empty ballroom, heels echoing softly on the polished floor. Where hours earlier there was noise and celebration, now there was stillness. She looked at the rows of empty chairs, the same chairs where young black women had sat, empowered and seen. She closed her eyes and whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. Not for revenge, not for recognition, but for the strength to have endured the fire without losing her voice. In the far corner of the room, a janitor looked up and nodded. He had watched everything. He had seen her from the beginning. "You changed something tonight," he said simply. Thalia nodded, humbled. We all did. And as she walked out into the cool Georgia night, stars overhead and purpose in her step, she thought about every girl still out there, still unseen, still unheard, still waiting for a sign. She hoped tonight had been that sign, because this wasn't just her story anymore. It was theirs. A story of dignity reclaimed, of power spoken softly, and of a future built not with noise, but with intention, grace, and the kind of strength that never needs to shout. Silent power. 1 year later, Thalia stood at the United Nations. She wasn't there as a guest. She wasn't there for applause. She was there to deliver the keynote at the Global Summit on Equity and Innovation. Her speech was titled simply "The Cost of Silence." As she stepped up to the podium, the audience stood delegates, founders, students, leaders from around the world. They already knew her name. But now, they came to understand her message. "When you silence someone," Thalia began, "you don't just hurt them. You rob the world of what they might have built." She paused, her eyes scanning the room. For me, it was an algorithm. For someone else, it might be a cure, a company, a movement. Every act of racism, every overlooked voice, it costs us more than we can measure. The room went still. No rustling, no phones. Only listening. And in that silence, she filled the space with something deeper than outraged truth. My silence wasn't weakness, she said, it was strategy. She took a breath. And when I finally spoke, I didn't speak to punish, I spoke to protect those who'd come after me. Because power doesn't always arrive in thunder. Sometimes it comes wrapped in resolve. And it echoes louder than hate. After her speech, the applause lasted longer than she expected. But Thalia didn't stay for praise. She stepped off the stage, straight into a group of young women waiting in the wings. One held up her phone, shaking. "My mom made me watch the video of what they did to you. I've never forgotten it." Thalia smiled gently. What they did isn't what matters most. The girl looked confused. "It's not." "No," Thalia said. "What I did next, that's what matters. And what you do next, that's where the future lives." She left the summit quietly, no press trail behind her. Just a quiet car ride through the city she once feared would break her. Back at her home, she opened her inbox overflowing again. One message caught her eye. It was from the same Detroit teen who had messaged her a year ago. I got in, the message read, "Full ride, Thalia. I'm going to college." Attached was a photo of a smiling girl holding her acceptance letter. Thalia stared at the screen. Heart full, eyes wet. That's why she did all of it. Not for headlines, not for payback, but for that smile. Because sometimes the biggest revolutions start with a single yes. That night, Thalia wrote back just one line. "You belong there, never forget that." She closed her laptop, stood by the window, and looked out over the city lights. Everything had changed. Not because of a loud protest, not because of a scandal, but because one woman refused to let cruelty define her, and instead chose to let her quiet strength transform everything around her. They called her a token. She became a force. They tried to humiliate her. She created a legacy. They underestimated her silence. But silence, when rooted in purpose, becomes unstoppable. In classrooms, her story became curriculum. In boardrooms, her name became a standard. In hearts across the world, her example became hope. Not everyone gets to witness justice in their lifetime. But Thalia did more than witness it. She built it. One spreadsheet. One decision. One act of grace at a time. And when asked, years later, how she survived it all, how she turned pain into power, she always gave the same answer. I didn't survive it. I changed it. Because that's what silent power does. It doesn't wait for change. It becomes it. And it makes sure that no one ever has to walk alone again. If this story touched your heart, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Every click helps us bring more powerful stories of empathy, justice, and silent strength to life. Your support is what fuels this journey. Let's keep standing together and rising higher, one story at a time. Stay safe and inspired.